Welcome back to the last daily rundown of the week. Thank you for watching Channel 7. I'm Dan Morfitt, and with me are my guests Zia Chowdhury and Wendy Olsen. Chaotic scenes marred the arrival of the Olympic torch in Rio de Janeiro last night. Hundreds of demonstrators, angry at the high cost of hosting the Games, protested, and riot police used tear gas and pepper spray to disperse the crowd. Images on news websites showed at least one policeman appearing to fire a projectile directly at a protester. Now, the Olympic torch arrived in Rio by boat after a 3-month tour of Brazilian cities. The police said that a group of people refused to leave one lane of the road open for the torch and blocked the street in one particular place. So the question has to be, is Rio ready for the Olympics? Zia, is it ready?
Doesn't seem that it is.
No.
But again, it's bizarre because we've been here before with the World Cup and with the complaints and concerns that people had at the time. That look, you've got all this mass poverty and you've got these huge stadia and all this money going down the football path then. And now it seems to be more of the same. So you think, well, what lessons, if any, were learnt, in those couple of years? Because everybody knows about the social problems of Brazil, and they're worse now than they were back then. It's in political crisis, let alone the problems with poverty. And yet we seem to carry on. You've got the celebration of human achievement with the sporting, with the games on the one hand, but then you think human achievement, and we can't even feed the people, and so how can we be surprised when we've got this sort of kick-off at the end of the day?
The Olympics are all about being higher, faster, stronger, but when that's at the expense of people living in slums anyway and then being cleared out so it doesn't look too bad on the TV, it really questions the morals of the Olympic purpose, doesn't it, Wendy?
I don't know. I think it's a timing problem. I don't think that Brazilians actually are against the Olympics, but they're taking advantage of this opportunity to get on the TV, to obstruct this. The situation there has worsened so much in the past year, and I thought I might try and maybe explain in my homely way what's going on there. Because they've had, over the past 30 or 40 years, Brazil's had really respectable governments. They've had governments that invested, they've had governments that did planning, that did regional distribution, and tried to develop each region having its own major city. They've developed new industries, so the biofuels industry. I don't particularly like the deforestation, but there's been a lot going on in agriculture. But now, lately, the government that's currently in power, which I thought was a very good government with good programs, they've been accused of corruption. So the other side brings these corruption cases, and they do get complicated and they slow everything down, and they've, in the end, they've brought a case successfully against the Prime Minister, the President, and then brought her down, forced her to step down, so there actually isn't a head of state. And it's created a crisis of legitimacy. And you just don't want this to happen in your country, because it's
never good when there's a power vacuum when the world's eyes are on you.
Yeah, and the police are so important. They shouldn't be so important, but because of all the poverty, the police usually in the past would have policed the boundaries between where people are living in slums and where workers are and where you're allowed to go. But the police are having a crisis of legitimacy as well. And people are saying, no, we're not putting up with this. And it's like there isn't the leadership and the feeling of clear lines of authority. And that's happening during this Olympics. It's just a really worrying situation.
Not to go too big on it, could we see a full-scale revolution in Brazil?
No, there's no revolution prepared. But full-scale chaos is much worse. It's worse.
Was this a bad idea for Rio, for Brazil, to have a World Cup and an Olympics 2 years within each other? Logistically, it sort of works out because you'd use the same stadiums, the same infrastructure. But they were clearly not ready for the World Cup a couple of years back. They're still clearly not ready for the Olympics now. And it all kicks off tomorrow.
I think, understandably, they probably thought that whatever difficulties they had with the World Cup 2 years later than that, you're going to have time to...
Almost like a rehearsal of the World Cup.
Exactly, you've had a dress rehearsal and then the Olympics will be fine, but that doesn't take account of the political crisis that's taking place in the intervening period. But I think there's a bigger question about when we plan these games, and of course Rio got it years in advance, but we need to distinguish between those countries that are stable and prosperous and generally don't have these kinds of difficulties, and those that have acute problems with poverty and social issues. Because going to have our games or World Cups in those countries, there has to be some parallel planning going on about addressing certain needs of the people, so that there isn't that sense of grievance in the air when those games do
a sense
around.
of balance for the people. If the nations get to the Olympics, the people of that nation should also get something. In return.
But that would just increase the cost, and when they make the bid for the Olympics, they've already estimated the cost, and they're trying to minimize the cost and yet do something really grand.
But hosting the world's biggest party can't come cheap.
It won't be cheap, no. But it reminds me somehow, I know a little bit about what's been going on in Brazil itself, and there's people moving out of Brazil and going into all the neighbouring countries, coming to Britain. It's an example where they can't at the moment come as refugees because they're not necessarily at risk of dying or being attacked.
And isn't Brazil supposed to be a growing economy, one of the world's emerging economies along with India?
Oh, wait a minute. How old is your information here? I mean, it's really in a crisis right now.
Really in a crisis.
Yeah. So if you start leaking people, the best people will leave. That's a really bad thing.
The brain drain starts.
But it's what they've done. They've impeached their own president. Now let's think. We didn't impeach Cameron. He left in a perfectly ordered way, right? And we didn't impeach Blair. So when the Chilcot report came out, the proposal from the other side of the table was, well, we should impeach Blair, or we should accuse him of, I don't know, contempt of Parliament for lying in Parliament. But they haven't actually done it, have they? And the reason is that many times the president should be immune from prosecution because that creates stability, right? If you thought that you could just take your president and arrest them, then you're not going to have stability. But in Brazil, they've broken that rule. They've accused her of corruption and impeached her, making her ineligible for office. And there's no president.
I'll tell you what we are going to see. We're going to see an interesting Olympics, I think, on the track and off the track.
Well, let's hope it can be peaceful.
All starts on Friday. Now, BBC Radio 1's audience has dropped to its lowest level for more than a decade after the station lost 1 million listeners in the past year. About 9.5 million adults a week tuned into Radio 1 between April and June, compared with 10.4 million last year. Radio 1 said that these figures were only part of the picture and that its digital platforms had grown. The station now has its smallest radio audience since the year 2003. But please don't worry. Radio is not dying as a medium, as Radio 4 and Radio 6 Music earned record listening figures, with 6 Music earning 2.27 million listeners per week and Radio 4 an absolutely massive 7.4 million. So is this just shifting youth habits, and is radio stronger than ever?
Radio 4. Now, there are people who love Radio 4, and they will listen to it from about 6 in the morning until late at night, every day, over and over. And I used to hate it, and I love it now.
I love Radio 4.
Yeah, and it's apparently, there's been a boom since this vote against Europe. People want more news. So a lot of us are listening to Radio 4, and you get a lot of information.
A lot of people are listening as well to LBC, a talk news station. Yeah. People are listening to Talk Sports, Talk Radio, and new digital station. Zia, do you listen to Radio 1 anymore?
No, I mean very rarely, and I used to be, it was a pretty much permanent fixture, certainly when I was driving, but now I don't. It's just noise, and maybe that's a sign of me getting old. But
no, the music was always bad.
But there was a time when I liked it. That was the difference. But now it just seems like it's too much, and you need the peace and calm. But I think it's also to do with society in general, that you've got a lot of noise, and you need to separate that from the calm thinking. And certainly with the noise of June the 23rd, I think Radio 4 did bring some calmness to proceedings, and that analysis and rational discussion without haranguing people. And
it's amazing. I am very impressed with it.
Are we just old now? Because we're all, 30, 32? I jest. But we're of an age, Radio 1's not meant for us anymore, is it? No. Surely. And, the population is getting older. So, of course, Radio 1's figures are going to go down because there's less youth, and the youth are now Snapchatting.
They've got other things, exactly, yeah. I mean, the youth have got so many other distractions to keep them busy. It's not like when we were kids, when it was only Radio 1 and not much else. Nowadays, you've got practically everything at your fingertips, in your pocket, that you can watch, never mind listen to.
Do you remember Ghetto Blasters, right? I mean, people used to carry the big box on their shoulder and go down to the town and play music out loud. That would be radio.
You are such a cool American.
But everything is changing now. It's very personalized. The bus is full of people with their earphones in, and they won't speak to you. They don't hear you. I often speak to people in the bus, I'm a little weird. And I say,
You're the person on the bus that you sit next to
I
somebody
lean
and then
over.
start talking to them.
Say, nice weather today. And they can't hear you because they got this in their ears.
It's quite a nice image to think of, like a 17-year-old kid on the way to college who's possibly listening to You and Yours or Women's Hour or the Today programme with John Humphreys. That's quite a nice image. That's a comforting image for the nation.
Well, I often
never
feel a
thought
bit,
of
you know, I do sometimes think that, why are they listening to music first thing in the morning on the way to, but then you have to stop yourself and think, well, they might not be. They might be listening to some very intelligent program that they downloaded earlier and wanted to catch up on, or something that's pertaining to their studies. And so you've got to be less judgmental as well, I think.
Do you think radio is dying, or do you think it's just changing, just evolving?
For me, personally, right, I have nothing against Radio 1. I think the music they choose to play just doesn't have words in it that attract people. So it has sound, like you say, it has a beat, but you cannot get the words. So how anybody learns those words, I don't know. But without that, it's kind of just inchoate.
Wendy, are you saying it's too fast? There's not enough words in there. Is that what you're saying?
I like ballads.
It reminds me of that Peter Kay sketch. You call this music, get a bit of Prodigy on. That was it. So that's going to be us saying.
Or the Beatles. I mean, they never play any of these great pieces.
But they play Bieber, and Bieber is the new Beatles. Right, it's time for another break now on the Daily Rundown. In a bit, we'll be talking about colonising the moon and also getting a digital detox. All coming up in 3 minutes here on Channel 7.